Hello, 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 and welcome to this week's edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch. With me, as always, is the good doctor, Phil Mackenzie, and we're looking back at UFC Lincoln. We were so excited, we almost jumped the gun to talk about UFC 228 this week. We just can't wait.
Oh, man.
We just cannot wait. And
it's just occupying my every waking thought is how much of a fucking banger Darren Till versus Tyron Woodley is going to be. Or, Tyron Woodley versus not Kamaru Usman.
Mm-hmm. Surely a fight that will live up to the hype of its own highlights.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
Look at all the knockouts.
Yep. And this fight's literally just going to be 7 knockouts happening in a row. It's going to be all those exciting moments and certainly none of the boring shit that precedes all those knockouts. Yeah, it's going to be great. And really, I was thinking, like, man, 228's coming around the corner. 2 title fights. This is a really big card. Maybe we should do what we often do and like break it up and talk about, preview some of these fights that we just don't have time for next week on this week's show. And then I looked at the rest of the card, and it's not the worst pay-per-view I've ever seen, Phil. But it is true. Yeah, it is a pay-per-view. That is also true. But no, we're going to stick with UFC Lincoln until next week because we do have a weekend off before UFC 228. As our friend and friend of the show, Mookie Alexander, pointed out on Twitter, Justin Gaethje and James Vick now have 19 combined KOs. Because, yes, a knockout happened. A very typical sort of Justin Gaethje knockout. And, Phil, did it make you feel a little silly for even considering that James Vick might win this fight? I mean, it made me feel a little silly. I was like, I can picture James Vick doing better than this, and I was like, I remember the feeling I had as soon as I rewatched his fight with Beneil Dariush, and I was like, no, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That is the sort of damning thing for Vick is that A, that fight must have been on his mind quite a lot. Mm-hmm. B, is the fight that both of us looked at. And I would imagine many other people looked at and were just like, yow, that's not a good look for you against this kind of style matchup.
Yo, James.
And see, it was exactly how this fight ended. Yep. Almost identical.
Yeah. Yo, James, this ain't it. Poor James Vick, right? Like, it was literally the same type of shit that happened in the Dariush fight. Same exact problems. Backing himself into the fence, 0 head movement. I want to talk about this, though. I think this is a good illustrative kind of fight. A, it reminds us, like, just because one person has lost a couple fights and the other person has won a few fights, that shouldn't have too much of an impact on how you evaluate the matchup between them. Obviously, there's a massive difference in quality of competition of recent bouts between Vick and Gaethje. Not massive, but pronounced. And many other factors as well. The style matchup is still the style matchup in a vacuum. But also, it's a good example, Phil, of like the limitations of being a tall dude. Of being freakishly tall and long for your division. Everybody always thinks of the advantages. I think that's what was occupying most people's minds, because a lot of people were picking Vick. They thought, and even a lot of people picking Gaethje were saying, like, I just see it, man. Vick is going to knock Gaethje out. I'm picking Gaethje, but I'm worried about it. And I think occupying a lot of those minds is the idea that, yeah, being much taller and much longer than your opponent is always an advantage. And there are areas in which being tall and long, or at least in which being used to being tall and long can be a real disadvantage. There are drawbacks to that. And when you allow a really hard puncher to get like in your chest, underneath your chin, and start throwing hooks and overhands, it really sucks to be tall when that's happening, because you can't see shit coming. And James Vick did not see that right hand coming. He didn't see it coming at all.
No. So in some ways, I think James Vick did an odd, for someone who got knocked out in a minute 27 or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. James Vick did a pretty good job in this fight. He had a lot of good ideas and a lot of good individual approaches he had a lot of ideas for how to approach Gaethje, and I think this is another sort of perhaps slightly more depressing thing about MMA, which is that sometimes it doesn't really matter if you make even multiple adjustments
sure.
to fight someone, and the core of who they are and the core of who you are still makes, terrible outcomes pretty likely.
Mm-hmm.
This is why I think it's illustrative to look back at even, very good fighters' early fights, because you can see the kind of things that their mentality or their frame or their, the kind of things that will trouble them even as they get much, much, much better.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so for Vic's part, you could tell he didn't want to get backed into the cage. He came out, he threw like a weird bicycle kick. He wanted to kick and he wanted to keep.
Yeah, he immediately tried
range.
like a double stepping knee. I think he expected Gaethje to rush him, or he just wanted to convince him not to, or whatever. But he was really, really concerned with that range and that pocket, avoiding the pocket early.
Yeah, but and he was very hard to low kick. He was good at kind of stepping back out of the range of it,
True,
kind of checking it, coming with the jab, and he did not want to get into a headhunting fight with James Vick either. Mm-hmm. So a lot of his work was to the body, and all these things made sense. And he landed like a big body kick pretty early, which clearly hurt Gaethje quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But the issues, as we kind of saw, the fundamental style issues were still there.
Yeah.
And one of the things is that Gaethje's offensive footwork is actually pretty good.
Yeah. And has gotten markedly better in recent fights. Like, it's better than it was not too long ago.
Yeah. So he was able to move in quick. He was able to move in with very, very short steps. He was able to step back out of the way of a lot of Vick's kicking offense. Not all of it, but enough of it to make him concerned that if I throw this, I'm not sure whether he's going to run onto it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that Vick is predisposed to want his range, to be at the tip of his punching range.
Right.
And he kept backing himself up until he was in the cage again. And it happened like, this seems like a lot of things to process, but in real time that happened really quickly.
Right. Yeah, Vic just has this situation where like Gaethje's he's on the end of a lot of strikes. He's taken some of them, but he's not like you said, it's hard to tell if he's going to run into it or not. Quite a few of them are like just coming short or missing. So it's not like he's just hanging around in a dangerous area, but when given the opportunity, he is constantly either cutting off to the side to pressure or coming forward. He's always threatening to come past the end of that reach. And that is like all it takes to convince James Vick that it's a good idea to start retreating. Because, yeah, he wants that reach. And that's the problem with being tall and long, having a big reach advantage as a fundamental aspect of your style is like you get really uncomfortable even at the idea of it being taken away from you. And yeah, Vick didn't look. I will say, like, for all the good ideas that Vick had, he didn't look comfortable to me for one moment during this fight. He looked a little, I don't know, nervous, shall we say?
I mean, I can't really. He never looks comfortable, really.
That's fair.
He's
That's
always
fair.
just sort of, got his kind of big fishy eyes, and he licks his lips after stuff happens.
It's like if
he's not a comfortable looking.
It's like if instead of this is extremely nerdy, but if instead of a hobbit becoming Gollum, if a troll became a Gollum. That's James Vick. He's just sort of a sunken giant.
Yeah. But yeah, so we saw the.
Hope people appreciated that. A lot of crossover between Lord of the Rings.
That's what
fans.
people come here for.
Yeah. Shall I also say that when he got knocked out, I imagined that James Vick was embodying the physics of like a Skyrim enemy being killed, and I imagined Justin Gaethje hitting him with that right hand at the top of like a 700-foot hill, and James Vick's body just slides down it endlessly. Constant building of momentum. It just never stops ragdolling down until it hits the bottom of the hill.
Yeah, it took him a while to get back up from that. He was climbing back up that hill for a while.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think, and we also saw one of the issues of speed and distance defense, right? Which is that if you're just gonna zip away from strikes, or if you're just gonna kind of try and parry them and move away without really moving your head or ducking, and basically trying to get away from a tall stance, particularly when trapped by the cage, you kind of got to pick a way to go. And this reminded me, in some ways, it reminded me of, I think, one of the sole interesting thing which happened in Till Thompson, which is when Till just realized, oh yeah, all I have to do is to throw a strike one way, then move the other way,
right?
And then he's gonna run into the lane which is left by my first strike.
Because his initial response to every threat is to try to make that space back again.
Yeah.
To try to reopen the distance. And that can't be, like, if that's your only response, it helps to have more efficient movements, right? It helps to be able to, I don't know, pivot, which is still shockingly rare as a maneuver in MMA. Even Stephen Thompson doesn't pivot all that often. He does a lot of sidestepping and a lot of, on his bike type of movement. But also, it demands more speed than I think Vick is capable of at this weight. I just don't think for Vick to play that game, for him to play the tall man's game of, I'm just going to constantly keep you on the end of my reach, those kinds of decisions that a pressure fighter like Gaethje forced on him are really, really difficult to match unless you're like a great athlete. You're just not going to be able to run away from all the different directions of attacks he's trying.
Yeah, I mean, I think in those, Whitman was talking about it before the fight. Mm-hmm. He was saying, all we got to do is just push him behind the black line, get him to the fence.
Yeah,
and I think everyone concerned knew that was the danger zone, but it was just that he couldn't stop himself from being pushed back there. He couldn't, because he was going to have to take discomfort early. In order he needed to not concede ground, like by putting himself into dangerous trading situations to stop himself from being put into the much, much more dangerous trading situation of having his defensive tendencies exploited by, trying to move backwards, simultaneously trying to move backwards into the cage and then move backwards along it, which just left him with his feet completely square. And Gaethje just knocking him out down the cage. Mm-hmm. Similar to Mendes McGregor as well, I think.
Sure, yeah, quite similar. Although opposite in terms of height and length. The opposite thing happening. But any other takeaways? There's not a ton to say. The fight went on for a minute and a half. So
just shout outs to how purely happy Gaethje looked immediately after he did it.
He didn't even James Vick's body wasn't even cold, and Justin Gaethje was grinning like a fool. He stood up from killing the man with a smile on his face.
Yeah, it's the fact that in those situations, the person, the winning guy, just normally go, he's screams with all the adrenaline he's letting go, or and he was just like, that was great. That was just the best thing ever. Look at that.
Yeah. He was just imagining putting the gif of that knockout on his fridge. He was just so proud of what he'd done. He wasn't pumped. He wasn't excited. He was just pleased. It was great. Let's talk about where these guys go next, just briefly, before we move on. We'll try to cover... we're looking at quite a few of the fights on this card, by the way, because it was a good card. We should say that. It was exciting. There were a lot of really good action-packed fights on this one. But before we move on to the co-main event, and then ultimately segments 2 and 3, what would you like next out of Justin Gaethje and James Vick? I'll go ahead and kick things off. James Vick go to welterweight. I feel like
yes, definitely.
Saw him at the weigh-in, just saw him get knocked out cold with ease by the second high-level pressure fighter he faced in this division. Doesn't seem like it's going to work out for him here. It feels like he has a hard ceiling at lightweight, given this second repeat of the Dariush result.
Yeah, he should go up to welterweight and just fuck up RDA.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
Only that wouldn't happen, I'm just going to say.
But imagine, James Vick's reach and size are not going to be unimpressive at welterweight. He's still huge. Is he taller than Darren Till, who boasts about being a light heavyweight? Because I think he is.
I think he is. I think he's got like an inch on him.
Yeah. And if James Vick could like pack on a little muscle, I mean, this man could be a middleweight or a light heavyweight someday. Let's not kid ourselves. So
yeah. Well, we're going to be talking a bit about perhaps the greatest weight transfer ever, like change of weight classes ever.
Yeah.
Later on in the. Well, maybe not. Slight exaggeration.
It's up there. It's up there in terms of like just
in terms
stark,
of like transformation. But
stark contrast.
James Vick cannot have looked down this card and seen one particular fighter and thought like, man, I couldn't replicate that kind of performance against high level welterweights. Yeah.
Imagine if I became suddenly a smooth, efficient knockout puncher moving up to welterweight. Could happen. So yeah, that's really the only thing I would like to see at James Vick. If he fights again at 155, then. It won't be the greatest reason I have to hate the people who work on his team, but it'll be another one.
Yep.
What about Gaethje? I mean, does this change your mind about him at all? Does it let you reevaluate his position or?
Nah.
Yeah.
I don't think I would. I still probably wouldn't pick the people I'd pick him against, but he's still a tremendously dangerous, fight for literally anyone.
Yep.
No one's going to get away from a fight unless they land the shot of their life, is going to get away from a fight with Justin Gaethje without taking any damage, apart from possibly Conor. But
other than McGregor, do you agree with the assessment that perhaps Poirier and Alvarez were Gaethje's two worst matchups in this division? Because they might be up there. Like, there are a couple other guys I can imagine him having a.
I think Ferguson and Diaz would be problematic. I think Diaz he could probably kick his leg off pretty badly.
And Nate's a lot slower than the likes of Alvarez and Poirier.
Yeah, so. I mean, I'm curious. I know like Dan Hooker wants to fight him. I'd be interested in that one. I think Edson. So I mean, the two main matches for Vic are Barboza and Lee, and I don't really want to see the Barboza fight. I have to say, I know people would love it, but I think it would be horrible for Barboza.
Yeah, give the man a break. I mean, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, like he just doesn't.
He responds badly to pressure. We know that.
Yeah, he backs himself up. He circles. He just tries to circle faster and faster.
Yep.
And I mean, he can circle, but he's not Anthony Pettis, but he can't circle very fast, and he has no power in his hands.
Yeah,
I mean,
he had a close fight dealing with the pressure of Michael Johnson, and
I mean, it wasn't that close. It was fairly one-sided.
Michael Johnson won it. He had his moments in every round. It was the kind of fight like that Edson Barboza has had a few times where his best moments of the fight were in like the first minute and a half. Because he had like all of his trained responses, he was countering, he was drawing the counters and moving. And then as the fight went on, the pressure got to him, and he was like, "I have to get out of this range." Over and over and over, he kept having to leap away and try to just get away. And yeah, that kind of attitude against Gaethje seems a little dangerous. So
yeah, I don't need to see it.
No,
but I would like to see Lee Gaethje, because they got some interesting ways they match up. Lee slightly rote striking, his somewhat suspect chin. Gaethje's actually pretty great wrestling defense, but we haven't really seen it tested against someone like Lee. How hard can Lee hit? Can he really hurt someone like?
And how much of a front runner is he is a big question to have answered against Gaethje.
Yeah. I think the Trinaldo fight for me answered a few of those questions. I think Lee's pretty good at coming back into fights. But his basic durability is a bit of a concern. He doesn't have a freak chin.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that's the one I'd like to see. Lee.
Yeah,
Gaethje.
I like the sound of that a lot, actually. I think that sounds like the right call. That, or, I mean, I'm happy with Gaethje Ferguson, too, if they want to do it. It doesn't bother me at all.
Are you implying that Tony Ferguson's somehow going to get past Anthony Pettis?
Oh.
Didn't you see how
Dare I
Pettis took out
suggest
Michael
it?
Chiesa? He's back. He's back, Connor.
You know what? Here we go. Just after that fight, okay, No, don't make that one. Forget that one. Just do Barboza Pettis again. All right, bring everyone back to earth. Remind us of why we're past the Anthony Pettis era. Okay. Yeah. Whatever. Gaethje is still Gaethje is essentially my takeaway from this fight, and I wasn't really worried about that beforehand. It feels even more certain now. Like if you just can't take a punch or you can't survive a war, Justin Gaethje is still going to give you problems. Nothing has changed. Let's talk very briefly about the co-main event. We're already running over a little bit on this first segment, but Michael Johnson, Andre Fili, they fought in the co-main event of this card. Strangely, as the co-main, maybe one of the worst fights on the card in terms of pure excitement. It wasn't a bad fight; it was fine.
Yeah, it was fine. It was relatively interesting. There were two guys who were fairly well matched, and it was very, very close. I don't have an issue with the decision. I think I probably gave it to Johnson. I mean, it was one of those fights where it was two guys who tended to freak themselves out a bit, who have tended to freak themselves out a bit. And for once, the guy who freaked out more was not Michael Johnson. Yeah. He looked like he was having a much better time in there. As the fight went on, I think Fili's game deteriorated. He had his plan to come in, which was, basically right head kick and takedowns. And as time went on, his takedowns became less well-timed and a little more desperate. It's
kind of the thing with Andre, isn't it? Like, it feels like that's what happened in the Bermudez fight as well. It's like he just kind of wears down over the fight and becomes less effective. I don't know. But he's also, there's this weird thing with Andre, like, he's really committed to this. I don't know. I think this is the alpha male in him. As different as he is from so many of the alpha male fighters, he really loves to leap around. Like, it would have been so nice to see him like relax and just like touch Michael Johnson, because he has a great frame and he could have done that, like he could have kept his jab on Johnson a little more consistently. And the right high kick I thought was a great idea. It's always a good move against a southpaw who likes to throw his left hand, kick him in the left hand or the head if he chooses not to block. But, Fili, like he was just, it was interesting because it was harder, I think, for Johnson to get a read on it. Fili did look quick, and he was able to get out of the way of a lot more shots than a lot of Johnson's opponents at 155 would have. But also, Johnson was able to time him with a lot of shots because Fili kept wanting to leap in from long range rather than just edging his way in and trusting in the fact that he had the longer arms. So
it's rare that so Johnson isn't the world's best kickboxer, but his tool set is made up of very functional pieces. And if he's not just planting it at his feet and throwing the 3-2 as hard as he can, which is notably, I think, what happened when he got taken down in the second and almost submitted. It was a sudden. He mostly fought like a pretty disciplined fight, apart from there was that one part where he just suddenly it was just like, oh yeah, Michael Johnson. Yeah,
he thought he had Fili in trouble, and just started swinging wildly, and Fili hit him with a beautifully timed double leg.
Yeah, that was gorgeous. He kind of took the angle and then just blasted him off his feet. But and in the end, Johnson just looked like he was having a bit of a better time in there, and just landed the cleanest shots over in 2 of the 3 rounds, and that's pretty much it.
Shit, if you're Michael Johnson, like, fighting an opponent who in any way becomes less effective as the fight goes on is kind of a dream, because you can have a near catastrophic fuck up like he did in the second round, where, like, honestly, for a second I was like, it's over.
Yep. Oh yeah.
He gave up his back. It's over. He's a Henry Hooft fighter. He just lost the fight. But you can avoid that being the end of the fight if the other guy slows down like you usually do. It evens things out a little bit. So, my evaluation, just like Gaethje, my evaluation of Johnson has not really changed one iota. I still think he's going to run into some problems here at featherweight, man. There's going to be somebody who tries to counter him with hands, and they're going to seem way too quick, and he's going to become very uncomfortable and try to brawl with them. But for now, he still looks exactly like Michael Johnson. And a fairly good version of Michael Johnson. So good on him for that. Let's take a break, Phil. When we come back, let's see. We got a couple other fights here, to say the least. We have Courtney Casey versus Angela Hill. We have the long-awaited death of Jake Ellenberger. Retirement. Good to see that, at least. We have
everyone stops the Juggernaut.
I'm the Juggernaut bitch, but there's no comma there.
Yeah.
So it's like...
Aww. That's not right.
To me.
The man just retired.
Yeah, sorry, Jake. Love you, buddy. We're also going to talk about our new boy who loves us just like Yoel, just like his father Yoel, Davison Figueredo, who eradicated John Moraga in impressive fashion. Eric Anders and Tim Williams had a fight. That happened. And James Krause and Corey Sandhagen did some big things on the prelims. So we're going to talk about all of that and potentially more or less after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Ruining our lives.
Well, speaking of conspiracy theories, the judging in this one. Hello, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're talking about the Russian judges who handed the fight to Courtney Casey. No, we're talking still about UFC Lincoln, of course, and Courtney Casey, Angela Hill. This was the third fight from the top, the fourth fight from the bottom of the Fox Sports 1 main card here. And I suppose I've already given away the lead there. I suppose we should talk very briefly about the scoring before we say anything else. Somewhat controversial, this one. How did you feel about it, Phil?
It was a pretty close fight.
Yeah.
I saw it for Angela Hill,
as I think many people did.
Yeah, I mean it was close. It was one of those ones you could see coming. It was an angry face decision.
Yeah, I was. I mean, the thing was is live. They had the fight metric stats on the screen, and they just didn't seem right.
No,
it was like
they really didn't, did they?
No, they just. Immediately you looked at those numbers, it was like they said they had Casey landing like 68 head strikes or something. I was like, that doesn't sound right based on what I just saw. And maybe if you were to count every single blow, which sort of grazed Angela Hill's face somehow, but really, like, she did a pretty good job managing distance. She stayed moving a lot. She kept a high guard most of the time. So she was not easy to hit clean and didn't really get hit clean nearly as much as those stats said. But also on rewatch, it was still a very close fight. And it was, it was one of those fights, too, where, like, Casey's size just sort of gave her an innate ability to no-sell the shit that Angela Hill was doing a little more than the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing, is that, yeah, like I said, somewhat flippantly, but I did feel like this was it was a classic, like, body language and facial expression decision. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can sometimes see them coming. Is that Casey just looks ferocious and determined, and the kind of, and I think this is something which I think plays more in live fights than it does watching remotely. Mm-hmm. Is that these kind of things, they just have a typical tendency to draw the judges' eyes towards them. There's a certain like energy. I guess the thing that the classic example would be Diego Sanchez. He just got this constant enraged expression on his face that you're just kind of waiting him to land one of these tensed up punches.
Yeah,
and it's enables him to pick up some heinous fucking scorecards over his career.
And much like Diego, there is also the classic explanation of volume. Casey outthrew Hill by quite a large margin in every round. And got outlanded in all but one of them, I think, according to the actual now revised official fight metric stats. And also, I think Casey was the only fighter who was hurt at any point in this fight. I think Hill got her with the body shots that actually really got her attention in the second round. But you can imagine yourself sitting from one vantage point watching it live and being like, That might have been Casey's round. All 3 rounds to Casey? I don't know about that. That's maybe a little suspicious. No. But, it was a close fight, so it sucks for Angela Hill.
I mean, both of their flaws were pretty well on display.
Yeah.
Is that Casey, is for some reason has largely seemed to settle into being a incredibly static combination counterpuncher, which is just an odd style. Mm-hmm. Just kind of stands there and waits for them to come at her, and then just tries to throw 3 or 4 punches to scare them off. And Hill, I think, she fought a good fight. I think, and this is the problem though, is that Casey seems like a pretty good style matchup for her, both before and during. Mm-hmm. But even then, it was still incredibly close, just because she doesn't hit very hard.
Yeah, and can I tell you my one huge issue with her in this fight? I mean, this is a general stylistic thing with her at this point. It's kind of ingrained, but you see Courtney Casey, and you are able to throw like one kind of attack. I think most people would say straight punches.
Yes.
Right? Like, her head's right there, and she's kind of tall, and she doesn't really keep a tight guard or anything, and she doesn't move her head, and her response to every attack is to start throwing and to take her hands even further away from her face. So straight punches. You hit her in the chin over and over and over, or in the nose, or whatever. And Angela Hill's style, it has the worst element of Dominic Cruz's style just embedded in it, which is not nearly as many straight... Like, mechanically, she has a hard time throwing straight punches. They just tend to come out loopy because of the way she kind of twists her whole body into it. It's like somebody whoever came up with Dominic Cruz's style overestimated the value of weight transfer in punching power and completely wrote off things such as, balance and stability and, torque. So she loses all these things. There's not a lot of snap or drive. And if Angela Hill was just a little more capable of throwing like a hard, straight shot right down the pipe, those are the kind of punches she would have needed, I think, to make the real difference. Where, as it turned out, like, Casey was the only one who threw some of those punches. Her best punch of the fight was a straight right counter to a kick from Angela Hill. So, like, yeah, those are the kind of exchanges where I think Angela lost out. She even if she was landing, it just didn't seem to have much impact. And in truth, it didn't. So
yeah, it was a matchup of kind of punching form with no footwork against footwork with no punching form.
Yeah,
and so Angela could land strikes and often did, but she was both up against a bit of a power differential, and she had to put herself into situations which weren't necessarily favoring her to do it. If you think of the good shots she landed, they were these little short turning overhand rights, little step in left hooks. It was all close range stuff.
Yep. Little quick stabbing right hands to the body, all in exchanges, all in the pocket.
Yeah, I mean, it was good. It was good fun. I'm concerned about both of them, really. I mean, Courtney Casey, there was a moment at the start, I think it was the start of the second, when she actually started coming forward and throwing.
Yeah.
And she suddenly became like 3 times more effective. And you suddenly thought, wow, she could be something if she could just do this consistently instead of just standing and waiting and trying to trade. And then it just disappeared again.
Yeah, that was where that right hand happened. A right hand that I saw coming like 3 seconds before it happened. Angela Hill got backed up, and I was like, don't throw a naked kick. Don't throw a naked kick. Don't throw a naked kick. She did it. She got countered. She was against the fence throwing kicks. She was going to get hit. But I did want to say, counter to that, Angela Hill did a good job pressuring. Like, I liked a lot about her strategic approach to this fight. She drew a lot of those misses out of Casey. And maybe that's apparently it doesn't work in MMA to make the other person throw in order to make them miss. But she did a very good job of that, of constantly making Casey throw and then getting in and out just on the fringes of range. Like, it was a smart showing. It's unfortunate. It looks like she's got like some things physically holding her back. Although I will say, I do want to bring this up. Angela Hill has like packed on some muscle recently. She's had her whole hashtag Fat Angie thing going on her Instagram, I think. And probably like I would like to see another fight, because if you're going to show maybe the advantages of packing on some mass, Courtney Casey is the giantest woman in this division.
Yeah.
She's really, really big for a strawweight. So, like, Angela Hill being undersized, as much as stylistically this was more forgiving, physically it was maybe one of the least forgiving matchups. So, I don't know. Angela Hill talked about fighting Alexa Grasso next, and I would be very happy to see that.
Yeah.
Interested to see, and I think that's maybe a more forgiving matchup for both of them, physically speaking. So, I'm down for that. Good fight, close one. Both of us feel like it went the wrong way, but it was close, and that's the unfortunate truth. How about Brian Barberena and Jake Ellenberger? We have a lot of technical analysis to give on this one.
What an absolute shock this was. Who saw this one coming?
Even Jake Ellenberger saw it coming. He was ready to retire after this. I think he was holding on hope. But yeah, this is why this is the part of fighting that makes you resent youth, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because, like, yeah, go on.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I thought Ellenberger looked actually pretty good technically.
Right.
He took his head off the center line. He drew out shots. He countered. He used footwork. He boxed well, but it's just not there. He didn't have the insane horsepower that he used to, and his never fantastic durability is just completely gone.
Mm-hmm.
It was very reminiscent of Liddell Franklin, where the Chuck Liddell that fights that first round against Rich Franklin is, to my mind, unquestionably the greatest technical Chuck Liddell ever to step in the cage. Like, he kicks and he moves well, and he throws in combination without just diving in behind combinations of punches, and then Rich Franklin clips him and he's dead.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much it, with like a broken arm, as I recall.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. So
Or like Rashad versus Dan Kelly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's
like, hey, he looks pretty good. He didn't get wiped out now, but it was also like,
yeah,
man,
that third round of Rashad against Dan Kelly, like, he fought in a way that he literally never had before or since.
Yeah, and it's like, man, you watch it, you're like, if he had fought this way when he could still take half a punch.
Yeah.
If only, But as it stands now, like, this was Jake Ellenberger's fourth loss in a row, all of them knockouts. He has been finished in all but 2 of his long streak of mostly losses recently, and in the last 5 years, I think he's fought, 11 times and won twice. So it's a good time for Jake Ellenberger to retire. It was disappointing. Again, like, there is a point. It takes a long time after you fall off. You really fall off the cliff physically for your mind to cease improving. So, like, that's why savvy veterans exist. You can fight up until in your early 40s, and your brain is still, like, understanding the game better and better and better. And so you, in a certain way, you're still competing, but at the end of the day, like, physicality counts for a lot. And at a certain point in this fight, Brian Barberena just sort of said to himself, I'm going to throw 4 punches in a row no matter what happens in the middle of them. And one of those punches grazed Jake Ellenberger's head, and that was all it took.
Yep.
So, fighting, it's a shitty sport.
Well, he's got a pretty good career to look back on.
Of course,
he knocked out. I mean, he was an absolutely horrific puncher.
Oh yeah,
and just general violence dealer. I mean, he knocked out Jake Shields. He was the first person to really badly hurt Carlos Condit that I can think of, unless you count like Andy Sewer in kickboxing.
Yeah. He was also the second, third, and fourth person to badly hurt Carlos Condit.
Yeah, that is an absolute shit kicking of a round.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, he's got a good one to look back on. It was a good time to retire. It could have happened a few years before, but I'm glad it finally happened.
Yep.
Because I didn't need to see that fight, and I'm glad that I don't have to see any others. I can just watch Jake Ellenberger's old fights if I want to, which is great. Let's talk about the flyweights, though. We saw this one as a sort of proving matchup for Davis and Figueredo. I think we both picked Moraga, right?
No, I picked Figueredo.
Smart move. Davis and Figueredo and John Moraga fought. I was expecting Moraga to give Figueredo some problems with his counters and his just savvier, more creative striking from range. He gave him a little bit of trouble, And then Figueredo got his hands on Moraga. And yeah, I kind of have a feeling that Figueredo is going to trouble a lot of flyweights with that top game and that strength on the inside. Because as soon as he got Moraga down, it was a completely different fight. And Moraga was not winning it from that point forward.
Yeah. So I picked Figueredo beforehand, and it was one of those. It's a pick I'm not particularly proud of because I couldn't really figure out why I was picking him. It's just that it was one of those things where my brain was just like, pick this guy.
Sometimes it doesn't help to overthink. You think your instincts were strong.
It was just like this guy he just radiates intangibles.
Right.
Like
yeah,
he makes smart decisions. He wins fights when not necessarily smart decisions, but he reacts very instinctively in often in ways which make sense.
Yeah, it's that the most intangible athletic talent I think is like proprioception. Like last week when I was like, he has a weird ability to tell from weird positions, like how to place his fist as he's leaping in to meet his opponent's chin, that kind of stuff. Or like a weird positional awareness. He just seems to have a really good sense of like where he is in space and how to move around his opponent. Like it feels like cheating. Again, it's like a certain kind of athletic talent where it's like, no, like I can't go as quickly as you. It's not fair. Slow down, please. And he didn't want to slow down.
Yeah, and like you said, it's not even just speed. It's just like it's just that he just instinctively knows where stuff is. It's just that combination of kind of speed and athleticism. I mean, so I think in that first round, Moraga locks up with him, and he's basically gonna hip toss Figueredo, and then Figueredo just sort of whizzes his way out of it, and then ends up with underhooks and just dumps him. It's just like, no, I'd rather be on top, thank you.
He's the kind of fighter who, if you try to take him down, he wins if he just manages to turn it into a scramble. He didn't have to defend the hip toss, really. He just ended up in a neutral scrambling position as a result of the attack, and that was a victory for him because he was on top seconds later.
Yeah, I mean, I guess and it was just the way that he just seemed effortlessly better at almost everything between fights when you see him, and that's often something you really kind of want to see from developing fighters, because despite him looking kind of old, he is how old? He's like 26.
Right. That's bizarre. He looks.
Oh no, he's 30.
He's 30.
Is actually. He's actually not that young.
He looks similar to Romero, who is 90 years older than him. But Romero's voice is that of a 7,000-year-old demon.
Yes.
Figueredo finishes this fight, and the first thing he says is, hey, Lincoln, I love you. So.
Oh, yeah.
He is, I mean, the Romero comparison feels very strong now. Even stronger than it was before. But Figueredo is one to watch in this division, man. Flyweight is kind of picking up the way bantamweight did a couple of years ago. Like, we got Alex Perez in there. We got Davison Figueredo. We got Shorty Torres. We got some fun up-and-coming talent in this division.
We got Jared Brooks, who would win 90% of his fights, apart from the 10% where he knocks himself out.
Right. Figueredo knocks everybody out. So what would happen if he fought Jared Brooks? Who would get there first? He
did. So.
Oh yeah, I forgot. They already did that. Yeah. So it's good. Figueredo is the real deal, and even if this didn't,
I mean, that is some. I think who was it that mentioned he's like a bantamweight, because he just kind of is.
Yeah, he's like, how all the bantamweights are like destructive punchers. He's just a bantamweight at flyweight.
Yeah, just like those elbows and that fucking body shot. Disgusting.
Plus, the new, as we talked about, I think when we talked about like stylistic traits endemic to different weight classes, he's a bantamweight who realizes that at flyweight, top control is really good. Like being able to hold down guys who are used to scrambling is great. So like he's got a style as well as a physical makeup that I think is going to be really, really effective in this division. So we'll see going forward. But how about one more before we... No, you know what? Fuck it, Phil. Let's wrap up this segment. When we come back, we have 3 other fights from this card to talk about. Most of them in brief. I think we'll have a few things to say about Corey Sandhagen. Most of the things we have to say will be shocked and disgusted noises. But we're also going to talk about James Krause, Warley Alves, and Eric Anders versus Tim Williams. We'll get to all of that after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Segment 3 here. Eric Anders, Tim Williams. These middleweights fought in the main card opener in UFC Lincoln last weekend. This was a matchup that I liked to some degree because I thought, well, we'll see what Eric Anders has learned from his promising prospect loss to Lyoto Machida. And what he learned seems to have been nothing. But it was an okay fight. What did you take away from it, Phil?
I think he learned the lesson that Ngannou learned against Miocic, which is that passivity is being technical.
Yes. As we all know, the fewer punches you throw, the more technical you are.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe that was something he just learned from Machida because Machida doesn't throw very much. But yeah, it was like he came in convinced that he had such a physical advantage over Tim Williams that when Williams threw something, he could just completely wreck him. And either that or he was just, as he said, he just came out flat. It happens.
He did warm up a bit as the fight went on. That was clear.
Yeah. I want to shout out to Tim Williams because I felt like he did a really good job with very limited physical tools. And I think a lot of people, and it is fair to say that Eric Anders did not perhaps make the best use of his physical tools, his own physical gifts early in the fight. But like Tim Williams, he fought exactly the way that he fought as well as he could, considering, who he was as a person. I mean, his physical ability. He came with, he didn't overreach on his punches. He threw in combination. He clearly researched, Aaron Anders' clinch and how to break out of it and strike on the clinch. And he even had pretty nicely timed takedowns. Mm-hmm. I mean, I just thought I was just actually pretty impressed and his reward for all this was to get his head field goal kicked into the stands by a former American football player.
Yeah. Let's talk about that very briefly. I just want to ask you one question, Phil. Do you think Eric Anders was carefully timing that kick for the exact moment that Tim Williams' fingers came off the canvas?
No.
I'm a little doubtful myself.
I mean, it's just one of those things where it was... He didn't realize what a huge gamble he was making at that point.
That he almost threw the fight away in that moment.
Yeah, it ended up looking like an incredible moment of timing and skill and so on. And I guess, he nailed it. What else can you say? But man, did he not know how close that was.
Yeah. Kicking him in, yeah. So I want to agree with you. Like, Tim Williams did a good job. Thought he had the right approach. I also think he lined up stylistically with Anders, or at least the approach he took here lined up better with Anders. Like, he made the right decision. Because one of the big things he did was just to kind of make Eric Anders lead. Yep. And Eric Anders doesn't like doing that. That is very clear. He hates it. He has very little variety to his striking. he really struggles to like come up with different ideas or different ways of throwing his strikes when he's forced to lead, which is the case with a lot of this kind of counterpuncher, right? Like sort of like Michael Johnson. In that, I get the sense that Eric Anders is a counterpuncher because he knows he's fast and powerful. And it's just easier. Like most people he spars and fights don't see his shit coming, and he can see their shit coming, and he's punching faster, and that's all it takes. And so it turns out like there's not actually a ton of subtlety or craft to his counterpunching, and so when you make him lead, that becomes a real liability. Speed alone is suddenly not enough because he's at distance, and you have the time to predict what he's going to do before he does it. So that was
I think I will credit him that I think he is also just a thoughtful. He is actually just a thoughtful, quite smart fighter.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he is
to a fault in some ways.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, he's almost exactly 3 years into his MMA career.
Yeah. Very true.
And I think he's to me, he is he's an old veteran. I think in the way he approaches the sport because he's 31. Mm-hmm. He would be a young veteran, but he's 3 years in, and you can see that he has an idea of what he wants to do. He doesn't really have quite the technical depth otherwise, but you can see him. He didn't get flustered against Machida. He didn't get mad as you would expect someone with his degree of experience to, or rush in or think I'm so much bigger and stronger than this like aging Brazilian. I'm just going to rush in and fuck him up. He was happy, perhaps too happy, to have a slow-paced kickboxing match with him where he was just like, no, I'm pretty sure I can figure this guy out. And similarly here, you saw him. He got kind of fucked up in the first round, and then second round came around. He was just like, you know what I need to do? I need to actually. I don't like it, but I need to throw in combination. So he started slipping that little shovel punch into set up his cross.
Every southpaw knows, Phil, you don't jab with your right hand. You only throw right uppercuts off the left. That's not for jabbing, all right? A jab certainly wouldn't have been helpful in this kind of matchup.
No. But and Tim Williams, for all his improvements, has absolutely zero head movement.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is there's a lot of ways of shading this result and being like, well, Anders this, but, and Williams this, but at the end of the day, like, perhaps this is my fault for having too high of expectations for Eric Anders. Like it probably is. That seems like the right answer. But at the end of the day, like Tim Williams is in some ways a very forgiving opponent for Eric Anders. He's very, very hittable. He's, as I said while watching the fights online, I said, fortunately for Eric Anders, Tim Williams is Ryan James' father, and taught him everything he knows about head movement and defense. Anders, 3 years into his career, I can be forgiving, but it doesn't really feel like he's on a phenom track, having seen this after the Machida fight. So
no, I mean, I think Zane compared him to Mike Perry. And albeit, Perry is aggressive and he is a natural counterpuncher. And, they both have an idea of what they want to do, and they both have, a good grasp of the intangibles, and they both have very little depth to their game at the moment. So, I mean, I think my main thing was, he still can't really fight outside of his one, he just doesn't have much depth to his game. I mean, he's not. I mean, to his credit, he's not willing to gamble his durability on forcing the fight, like on just forcing his athleticism on people. He's not just going to be like, oh yeah, I'm just tons bigger and stronger and faster than you. I'm just going to bum rush you. He is actually willing to take slower paced fights, which he might struggle with, but it'll also mean that he'll probably, and I think he'll end up being a better fighter for it. But yeah, I mean, it was mostly just, I think Williams did surprise him. He surprised me a lot.
Sure, same.
So, well done.
If Anders wants to add a little depth to that game, last word I'll say on him, maybe he should take a cue from Andrew Sanchez, who also fought on this card, and go to TriStar, because Andrew Sanchez is now capable of throwing combinations and jabs. Which he did not do before at all. So, it feels like, I don't know, I don't want to malign the coaching quality at Spartan Fitness,
But Anders does feel like one of those fighters like Perry, who could really benefit at this early stage in his career from I don't know, some kind of change up in which he starts taking his training really seriously or takes a different tack. Because he does still have that potential. That's the Mike Perry level, essentially, is you're not a phenom, but you still maybe could be.
And I will give credit to the team to whoever's training Tim Williams, which I think is Team Balance. So, I mean, they did about as good a job of training Joe Lozon's Titan form as...
Hell yeah. Yeah, way to go, Team Balance. Seriously, yeah, it was a good showing. It was a very good showing from Tim Williams. All right, let's move on then. The Fox Sports 2 prelims is apparently, I didn't watch this on Fox Sports 2, but they were apparently on Fox Sports 2 over here. And we had a welterweight fight between James Krause and Warlley Alves. Earlier in the show, Phil, you tipped this one off a bit when you said that we had an example of the benefits of moving up in weight on this card. A prime example of how a fighter can just transform simply by stopping the weight cut, by removing that as a major part of their camp. And
James Krause will forever be the archetype I will go to now.
That was James Krause in this fight. James Krause has been a good fighter for a long time. He's had a lot of good wins and good fights, and he's always had this vibe of being like a sparring sort of fighter. He goes in there and sort of does the young veteran thing where he doesn't seem to have a sense of urgency. He just kind of feels like he's just practicing and just trading with his opponent lightly. That was not the impression his style gave here. He fought Warlley Alves, who is a very dynamic, finish-focused welterweight in his own right, and James Krause beat the pants off of him. He just dominated Warlley Alves. He had a little trouble early, but as soon as he got into the rhythm of the fight, it looked like a vastly different James Krause. I immediately, as soon as this fight finished, I said, that was the best performance I've ever seen out of James Krause.
Yeah.
Yeah, you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, a career highlight.
I agree, yeah.
I mean, he just made... Because, he tends to have these kind of sparring match fights, and they go one way and they go the other, and sometimes he'll pull out some neat, tricky shit of exactly the kind that you'd expect from someone like that, who'd be like, hey guys, check what this latest thing is that I've got. Let me show you on the mats kind of thing that he'd, like when he got that little outside trip into, I think, into choke against Darren Cruikshank, I think it was. But, I mean, he just... And this is the classic example of our argument that knocking people out is about accuracy, and going up in weight, as long as you have the reach parity and the grappling defense, will make it easier for you to knock people out.
Yeah. Because
James Krause is one of the most feather-fisted lightweights I can think of. He is legendary for it. I mean, just having these fights where he would land a ton of punches on people and then they would just hit him back harder.
He's fought 33 times. Coming into this fight, he had 6 knockouts on his record. And Warlley Alves, as you pointed out before, has never been knocked out.
And how many of those knockouts were head kicks? Because he's got a good head kick.
Yeah,
Has he actually punched people?
One of them was an ankle injury against Jamie Varner.
Oh, yeah, that famous knockout.
That was his last knockout. The last one before that was a KO of punches against Guilherme Trindade at RFA 4 in 2012.
Yeah.
So, we're not looking at a noted puncher.
Head kick.
Yep.
And then punches of Shane Hutchinson.
Just like Demetrius Johnson, right? Like the only knockouts on his early record are head kicks. Because if you can hit someone in the side of the head with your shin, you can knock them out.
Yeah. So, I mean, he looked phenomenal. I mean, Warlley Alves looked atrocious. I mean, this was also a shockingly bad performance from Warlley Alves, but
I think Krause brought it out of him, though. Krause was even had more swagger to his style than usual. But
I mean, if I thought about this fight, I was always thinking, Warlley Alves is going to win this because he's going to take Krause down and submit him.
He's not going to outthink James Krause. He never was.
Yeah, and he's not going to outbox him either.
Right.
I would have been, but he. I mean, I was shocked at how little of a wrestling game he actually has. I mean, when it came down to it, because James Krause has not been invulnerable when it comes to big, strong welterweights out wrestling him. Hence, Jesse Taylor and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and Alves has been willing to hit takedowns on people, but I think we just realized he's never really been able to consistently out wrestle anyone with a good wrestling pedigree. And in this case, he just clearly has no idea for how to set up his shots from the outside either. I mean, it was quite damning.
Yeah, but then again, like, James Krause was giving him the clinch and was pressing the wrestling on his own right. And I don't think Alves liked that. I mean, I think the pressure of Krause had a lot to do with how Alves showed up. I'm still gonna lean on that because, like, he forced Alves to swing. Like, he forced Alves to start trading with him from the get-go when Alves was, I think, trying to fight a little smarter and trying to manage the pace, which he has been doing in recent fights because he has to. Krause was putting a lot of pressure on him. Even when he wasn't, beating him up early, he was making Alves work. He was getting in his face. He was clinching. He was shooting for takedowns when Alves would tie him up to slow him down. He was constantly making him address things. And the reach certainly helped with that, but when has James Krause ever been that good at using his reach? When has he ever?
The thing is, this is the interesting thing, right? Is that James Krause, he's always been a good, guy at keeping people on the end of his reach and landing shots. But it's just the fact that in the past, people were just able to literally eat his shots, bite down on him, and then just hit him in return much harder.
Right.
And it wasn't the fact that they were, bigger, more powerful hitters. I mean, they were more powerful hitters, but it wasn't the fact that, they were bigger that was enabling that. It was the fact that they were faster.
Yeah, they would zip under one of those pawing jabs, and it would be over for James.
Yeah, so if you watch, the classic example of this, if you want to see, the dynamic, is the Valmir-Lazaro fight.
Right,
Is that he lands all those, I believe he technically outlands Valmir-Lazaro in every round. There's no real argument for James Krause winning that fight because every now and again, Lazaro is just able to slip underneath or even just come straight through a jab and then just crack James Krause. And Wally Alves was simply too slow.
Yeah.
And he's
Which is crazy because he's athletic.
He's athletic, fast.
Right.
He's a specimen in that division.
He just looked.
Yeah.
The slight difference the division change makes, right? Like, Michael Johnson is hugely fast for lightweight. Andre Fili, not one of the better athletes at featherweight in the top 10, but still, I think the speed difference there was notable to a degree in how Fili was able to just sort of cheat his way out of shots that a lot of lightweights would have eaten. And here, Krause is not a fast lightweight. He was not an amazing athlete by any stretch of the imagination. Wally Alves is a very good athlete at welterweight, very explosive. And despite that, and Krause was still visibly the slower fighter in this fight. But he's used to being the slower fighter,
Yep.
So it was just taking the difficulty down half a notch. He's like, all right, this guy's fast, but he's fast for welterweight. He's not the fastest guy I've ever fought. It just felt better. And these are probably the kinds of guys that Krause trains with too. I think you may have mentioned this recently, but fighters spend most of their careers training and not fighting. And probably the vast majority of people he trains with are welterweight sized, are not, they're not people who have cut the weight to lightweight. He's probably used to fighting slightly larger, slower guys, has more experience with that. I don't know. It just seemed like James Krause was having a good time. He was just relaxed and on top of everything. Nothing surprised him. Nothing worried him. He looked completely confidently in control. And just kept his jab in Alves' face and did all kinds of stuff with it. Set up all kinds of nice shots and a great showing. This will henceforward be the archetypal example. James Krause, if you don't want to move up in weight, watch this fucking fight and then watch one other fight of James Krause's. Any other fight. Watch his fight with Alex White. Watch his fight with, I don't know,
Alex White, former featherweight.
Yeah, right. Yeah, watch
who James Krause has just basically gives up on the stand-up against.
Right. and then watch him striking here against a dynamic welterweight who, even if I never expected him to outbox Krause, I still thought it might be possible that he might just leap in and nail Krause with something. You know, like, he's that kind of fighter. He didn't even have the chance. Krause did a really, really good job and looked.
Yeah, if James Vick doesn't look at this fight and think that is a weaker, that is a softer hitting, less powerful, smaller James than I am, who just completely fucked up a very well-regarded welterweight. Maybe I should give this a shot. But that is just crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, one more thing to address. Get your barf bucket ready, Phil. We're going to talk about Corey Sandhagen's arm.
That's technical analysis right here.
Yeah, Corey Sandhagen experienced one of the most grisly, terrible arm breaks. He also had, I just want to highlight this again, Sandhagen fought Yuri Alcantara, who did what Yuri Alcantara seems to be, like, this seems to be his approach going forward now that he's an old man, is just to try to obliterate every opponent.
That's historically his.
True, but it has worked a little more lately. So now I think he's at the stage where he's given up on trying to be a savvy veteran. You know, like, there was a period there where he stopped doing this and was like trying to be a little smarter, like around the time of the Jimmy Rivera fight. Now he's just gone straight back to it. He wants to obliterate every opponent in 45 seconds, or else he just doesn't want to do anything.
I mean, to be fair, it might just be an opportunistic thing, because what exactly did he do again? He hurt Sandhagen with something on the feet, right? And then took him to the ground and started attacking. I think he went to the. Did he go to the back and then attack the armbar?
Let's find out.
But anyway,
I'm gonna watch it right now. He comes out, he swings a big shot. Yep, he literally just throws like left, right, and nails Sandhagen when he's a little cold and not ready for it. And then he whizzers him to the ground and jumps on an armbar from the back with a reverse triangle lockup. With just a regular triangle lockup. And then he had the armbar with the triangle. Sandhagen was completely stuck. His arm went in a direction I would describe as incorrect. It wasn't the direction I would expect his arm to go. And it did that for a long time. And then he got out of it and beat the absolute ass off of Yuri Alcantara. So I don't know how much technical analysis there is here, but like, if there are certain questions you need answered about promising up-and-comers, one of them is often like, are they a tough maniac? And Corey Sandhagen is. Like, that kind of will is going to get him past what may be some athletic disadvantages against top bantamweights, because he really, really wanted to win this fight, and you could tell.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really criticize Yuri too much for being a 39-year-old bantamweight and just really going for it.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, what are you going to say? Like,
it worked.
You could probably, like, feel bits of the guy's arm moving around like he was deboning a chicken.
It literally worked. His approach won the fight, and Corey Sandhagen just decided not to lose. Like, that would have beaten almost any other fighter he did that to. They would have tapped.
Yeah, he was just like, the only reason I didn't finish him is he never tapped, but the armbar was perfectly locked in. It was like, it was.
Mm-hmm.
What else do you want?
Yeah, it's kind of like the Dwalish Willie. Like, he did go unconscious. He just disagreed and tried to resist. So, what else is there to say, Phil? I mean, that's it, really.
I mean, Sandhagen, looking forward to seeing him again. He's an insanely tough motherfucker, and
it was disgusting. It was impressive.
It was. Yeah, there was a lot of pretty gruesome, a lot of pretty impressive finishes on this card. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was a good one.
Mm-hmm. Midwest showed up for this one. So all right, that's this week's episode of Heavy Hands, and thank you all so very much for listening. Next week, we're going to come back at you with the UFC 228 preview, and as much as we have griped and already started digging in our heels about it, there are some very notable fights on that card. We have 2 title fights, one of which required the UFC to strip their own interim champion in order to make it. That's Tyron Woodley versus Darren Till. And then the second women's flyweight title fight which sort of just feels like a setup for Valentina Shevchenko to become the flyweight champion, as the UFC always intended. But we'll see as we come nearer what those fights look like. And, of course, highlight of the main card, TBD is back, taking on Zabit Magomedsharipov. So just can't wait for that event. Come back next week to hear a preview of all of that. And that's about it for us. Find us on social media with your comments, your questions, your concerns. Twitter is probably the best place for both of us. You can find Phil on there at Evil Greg Jackson, and you can find me at Boxing Bush. That's BUSCH. Check us out on Patreon. Support us on there for the bonus content. And we'll catch you guys next week. Until then, if you came here for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.